Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 4 prop stream for the 3M Open. Gonna get you guys ready for all your exposure tomorrow with a look at the averages from round number 3. We'll talk weather for Sunday as well as some exposure on Underdog and Prize Picks, as well as matchups on the sports books that have already mixed in as well. But hopefully this Saturday is treating everyone out there fantastically, and you're ready to get after it for the final day. And it looks like we have a few sweaty tryhards in the chat already. We have Gsluke, who is a regular on the channel, also Hooves in the chat, and Hooves has got some blends in the cup, so I'm jealous. Not quite there myself, still on water at this point, but yeah, excited to talk some golf. Nice to see an amateur at the top. Michael Lasasso, by the way, an absolute stud college golfer, and got Antonio in the chat as well. So feel free to hit me up with any sort of bets that you guys want me to deep dive, but you guys know the drill. We're going to start with conditions, weather, kind of what to expect on Sunday, and then afterwards we're going to talk through my exposure. So probably about 5-10 minutes from now is when we'll go through all of the Underdog and Prize Pick stuff. So until then, feel free to let me know anything you want me to deep dive later on. But first off, we got the averages on the screen, which I think are going to be slightly helpful for Sunday, but just know that it's going to play a little bit harder tomorrow. And there's a couple reasons for that. One would be slightly more consistent wind in the forecast. Also, hole 16, that was drivable for today. And then maybe a tougher pin location or two. And while we don't have the pins quite yet, they're probably posting them any second now. Sundays, usually a little bit harder than what we have for moving day. So though it did play to this minus 2.91 average, I personally have it closer to -2, maybe -2.5 for round number 4. So a few of those reasons that we've outlined, I'll touch on in just a second. But your birdie average went up to 5.24 per round. Bogey average was only 2.15, which a lot of came down to the setup of the course. You had some moving day pins, also some tee boxes that were moved up as well. Your fairway average didn't move that much. In fact, it was split right down the middle between what we had for the first few days, which was kind of what I thought would happen. So not really a surprise there. But the last one, 13.63 green and regulation average, I thought it was going to be like 13.25 to 13.5 per round. That cut line, getting some of your lower tier guys out of there, really made the difference compared to the first few days. In fact, even with that wind in the afternoon kicking up a bit, it still was 13.6 per round. Now, to note about some of the changes heading into tomorrow, weather. So let's start with the winds. They look a little bit more substantial than today. I'm going to stress the word a little bit though, because it's really only like a 2-mile-an-hour difference across the board. And then the pin location setup. And if you take a look at hole 16 today, that's a tee box. That's really going to be an X factor. They moved it up 100 yards compared to the first few rounds. So that's maybe like a quarter, maybe even a third of a stroke difference right there. So that takes us from 2.9 to maybe 2.6, 2.5 under par. Then you add on a few harder pin locations and that wind, and that's why I've got it in that -2 to -2.5 range. So the impact of that on some of these other averages would be the birdie average is likely going to drop. I would say to like 4.75 per round, but there's a chance that it's still closer to 5. And then your bogey average, I think, could get up closer to 2.5 per round, but something around 2.4 is where I would center that sort of average. So, just slight differences on some of these different categories. Maybe it does go up to like a 2.5 bogey average, but nothing drastic, right? It's not going to go from like a 2 to a 3+ bogey average. You're not talking about the birdie average going from 5.25 down to 4 per round. Much smaller differences than what we just said there. So fairway average, I would say that one might go ever so slightly down, but at most maybe to like 8.8 at the very lowest. And then your green rate, I do think will drop a little bit because the pin locations could make it a little bit harder to hit greens. And then the course is going to dry out a little bit more than what it has over the last few days. So maybe that goes down to the 13.25 like I thought it would for today, but nothing more than that. So hopefully it gives you guys a little bit of an expectation of what to expect for round 4. And now let's talk through some exposure that I've already gotten to. So by the way, we're going to keep this one a little bit quicker than most of these live streams that I typically do. It's been a long week, a little bit cooked at this point. So just going to stay really to the point here and touch on everything that you guys need to know, and no yapping this time around. But speaking of, let's start it off with this under on Just for Svensson fairway. So he's at 8.5 fairways, and I would say that this line's too large. average, considering his baseline on tour. And if you take a look at his fairway rate on the tour, it's number 145 out of 170 players. So he's in the bottom 25 of anyone on the PGA Tour. And if that average is going to be about 8.8, maybe 8.9 per round, somebody like Jesper is projecting for closer to 8 fairways than he is at this 8.5 mark. So I think that there's some value towards the under. And if you take a look at his results over the first 54 holes, he's gone under this in all 3 rounds. And you guys know I'm not a last 5 watcher, but if you take a look at his performances over the last few months, he's only gained accuracy to the field in one of his last 10 starts on tour. So, he's been having some problems finding the fairway, hence why he ranks outside the top 140 in that category. So 8.5, even though he's only like minus 125 for his under in DraftKings, I think he should be juiced even more heavily in that direction. So not every single prop I'm going to take at a Birdie Fest is going to be a positive stance play. And we've already mentioned it multiple times this week, but fairway props are a really good way to take a quote unquote fade and boost up the payout on a site like Underdog without actually having to take a fade, because, us taking an under on fairways here isn't so much a conditions fade as much as it is Jesper just has a hard time finding the short stuff. And that's because he's a long player, an extremely a bomber, as some would say. And it's hard to hit fairways when you're hitting it over 300 yards through the air. And then the other prop I mixed it in with was this over on Jake Knapp greens regulation. So he's at 13.5. I actually got a better payout on this. So this is an example of when being on the Patreon page has its benefits. I got Jake Knapp for a 1.06 multiplier. So the payout that I got by mixing those two in was 3.27x. It's not drastically different. In fact, I'm not really against entering this still at 3.09x. But the 3.27x, that nearly 0.2 unit difference adds up in the long term. So of course, I guess that's just another reason that you guys should be a member over there on the Patreon. But at 13.5, reason why I like that over on Knapp is if we go back to the averages, it was 13.6 today, even with some wind. I think it's going to go down ever so slightly, 13.25 to 13.5 per round. Jake Knapp is a top 70 green and regulation percentage player on tour. And this week, this is crazy with Knapp. If you take a look at his stats for this week alone, he's only missed 5 greens over the first 54 holes. That means he's 49 of 54 in hitting greens. He's gone 17 and then hit 15 greens regulation today, which is by far the best of anyone in the field. So the rest of the board is pretty much at 13.5. You actually have a lot that are juiced towards the over, like 0.85, 0.89x towards the over on a site like Underdog. That's why when I saw Jake Knapp with a 1.06x multiplier towards the over, it was like the biggest no-brainer of all no-brainers, because, if these other guys that are ranking a little bit worse than Knapp are all juiced towards the over, then why is he in the opposite direction, especially as the number 1 player in the category this week? And again, the last 5 watchers, I have a lot of disdain for them and what they use, but it's not even just the last 5 that are great for Knapp, right? He's been doing it this week. And over the season, he's that above average green regulation player. So that's why I took those two. Again, slightly better payout what I got for my exposure. But even at that 3.09x, I really don't think it's the worst. And then on Prize Picks, we're going to touch on a few different categories and also incorporate Live Golf into this. But first, I want to talk some strokes. So if I think the stroke average is going to be like -2 to -2.5, that's why my first inclination on the board wasn't just to take unders on everyone, because I actually think the Prize Picks pricing is pretty good with a -2 to -2.5 average. Now, there are some exceptions. That's why I've taken a lot of unders on strokes at this point, but I don't think it's the kind of slate where the entire board is mispriced. Rather, they had some guys at 68.5 strokes, so having to shoot -3 to cover, that I thought shouldn't have been at that number. So to point out a few that have already bumped, because this is once again another example of why being on the Patreon page is a great asset, is because you can get all of these props as soon as they drop and before a bunch of line movement. So for example, Taylor Pendrith, I got at 68.5. He's somebody that was like -140 for the under on books. Akshay Bhatia at 68.5, a Kurt Kitayama at that same number. Not going to point out every single one because there's even more bumps that ended up happening. But a whole bunch of guys at that number to shoot -3 that I thought was reasonable. And let's go back to the averages and set the table again. -2 to -2.5 scoring average means to shoot -3, you have to gain a half a stroke to a stroke to the field. An elite tier player like a Taylor Pendrith, for example, just the biggest no-brainer of all no-brainers, because he averages in regular field events, even like signature and major championship fields, a half a stroke to a stroke gained. In a field like this, which is much weaker, again, it's towards the end of the season, not everyone's teeing it up. A lot of your elite tier players in the top 50 aren't even in town this week. Pendrith is one of those elite tier players. So rather than that half a stroke to a one stroke baseline, you've got to give them a stroke to maybe even a two stroke gained baseline at this sort of golf course. So I have this, especially at 68.5 strokes, is like a half a stroke to a full stroke value at the very least. Now, Fowler's one that hasn't moved. That's why we're going to use it as the one that we're taking for the live stream here. But the same thing applies. He's been playing borderline elite tier golf lately, gaining about 1.6 strokes per round over his last 12 measured rounds. And this week, if you take a look at his shots gained metrics, again, we're keeping this one quicker, so I'm not going to have all that data for you, but I do have it off the top of my head. I've already entered all these. He's gaining ball striking, in fact, over 3.5 strokes ball striking, and has lost strokes with the short game so far. So kind of doing it in the exact fashion that we're looking for. We want ball strikers that aren't overdoing it with the short game, and that's been Ricky Fowler. So that ball striking gives us a floor. You always want a solid ball striking floor because you can continue that from day to day, let alone if he bounces back of the short game, right? If we get a bounce back, him gaining a stroke or two in the short game categories, then book it, right? He's going to be able to cover that sort of -3 for us. But that sort of value, he doesn't have a line on the sports books. But if guys like Pendrith were -140, -150 for the under, and Akshay, Kurt Kitayama, I think Kitayama is maybe the most glaring example of it. Ricky's been playing better golf than Kurt Kitayama. So if Kurt is -140 under, I would argue that Ricky could be even better value than that. So I mix that in even without that sort of line for comparison. And there's a lot of unders on strokes that make sense. In fact, there's quite a few that still haven't bumped. Again, Patreon page is where you guys can find every single slip that I'm taking. But hopefully that little piece of exposure that we're mixing in gives you guys a sense of what I'm expecting. And then for the birdie averages, because they're moving back 16, and it's probably not going to be as birdieable as today, I would say that if they had the 5.25 average, that like an over on Jake Knapp would make sense. Like a lot of these elite tier guys that they have at 5, it'd be like, oh yeah, you want to take overs on those. But if they move it back and it goes down to that like 4.75, maybe the 5 average, I don't think that they're as glaring of value. In fact, getting to 5 birdies, I think is going to be pretty popular for your elite tier players. 5 birdies, 2 bogeys or worse. 2 bogeys or worse, by the way, is where they have almost the entire field. Gets you to that -3. So even though there is double bogey risk at this golf course with all that water, you can't really, account for that, or you can't be too scared of that ahead of time. If it happens, it happens. For example, Emiliano Grillo, I took for an under on strokes today, and he hooked me by 0.5. Is what it is. In fact, I'm playing an under on Grillo again at that same exact number for tomorrow. So it's clearly not impacting me all that much. So that's my strategy for strokes. And which, by the way, guys, meant to mention this off the bat. Good on Jake Knapp to cash us out on the slip that we took for round 3. And it's been 3 profitable days so far. So I know I got a little bit ahead of myself trying to keep this in a little bit quicker, a little bit to the point. But round 3 was pretty good for us, especially on the live stream stuff that we talked about. It's see if we can continue it into the last day. And then let's go to the live golf side of things. So I have an over on Bryson DeChambeau birdies, and it's mostly weather-based. So the weather was really shitty today. We talked about that on last night's live stream. Tomorrow, it doesn't look great. But as you can see on this UKV model, it's not nearly as significant as today. You had closer to 15, 20 miles an hour of sustained wind gusts that were even close to 30 miles an hour at times. And it's still going to be a little bit more windy than round 1. So round 1, it played to a -1.3 average. Birdie average was about 4 per round, but I think it's going to be split down the 2, right? It's not going to play the whole way to -1.3. It's not going to play as hard as -0.4. Something like 0.8 under par is kind of what I'm projecting for, and a birdie average closer to 3.75 per round. So you may say, oh, birdie average is 3.75 per round. Well, why are you taking a Bryson DeChambeau over? Well, Bryson is the number 3 birdie maker on all the live tour. You're talking about an elite tier player in the category, and the live tour, by the way, because it's so polarized, you have some older players that are way past their prime that are much worse than your average player on the live tour. There's outliers that really throw off those averages. So even though the average might only go up to like 3.75 to 3.8 per round, your legit PGA Tour pros or Live Tour pros, I suppose, on that side of things, probably closer to a 4 average for the field. So a player like Bryson, who is not just average, he's way, way above average. I've got projecting for closer to 4.8 birdies or better per round. So I'll take that. He's gone to 4 both days, by the way. So he's gone slightly under this line. But even with that, he's still in the top 15, top 20. He's still playing some pretty decent golf. And if you watched the golf, if you've seen his interviews, his reactions all week, he looks miserable. I mean, he looks like he's playing the worst golf that he's ever played before. And the guy would have hooked this line by 0.5 both days. So I know some people may look at that as a negative and go like, oh, Bryson's, doing his spiel where, if he's not playing well, he's not the happiest guy on the course. But that tells us that he feels like he can be playing a whole lot better than what he is right now. So I look at that as a positive. And just from the numbers perspective, when I have somebody at like 4.75 to 4.8 birdies, that's going to be value at that sort of line. And the beauty is with mixing in both different leagues is that we get a full 3x payout by mixing them in, which is advantageous over the 2.75 or even the 2.5x payouts that you sometimes get on a site like Prize Picks here. So those are going to be the 2 slips that we take. I'll go over any bets if you have them for me in the chat to deep dive. And speaking of which, before we do so, I do want to talk about these 2 matchups. So I don't forget about the sportsbook side of things, let's go through these 2. I didn't enter any matchups today. It's the first time in like 3-4 weeks that I haven't entered any matchups for slate. And it's because of the 2-ball format. 2-ball format gets completely butchered by Hard Rock Bet. And last night, they didn't even post a board. So I had no choice to enter any matchups on my end. But I'll still deep dive them for you guys. Right? I know a lot of you guys are playing on sports books and you do have access to these. And the market that I would play, and if they post on a Hard Rock Bet, I will be trying to get access to these 2, is the one without the tie. So these 2 are without the tie. It's Matty Schmid versus Rico Hoey, and then Luke Clanton versus Alex Smalley. And it's 2 players, in my opinion, that are better between the 2. Like I have Schmid as the better player between him and Hoey. I have Clanton as the clearly better player between him and Alex Smalley, and you're getting plus money in both cases. So with Schmid, if you take a look at the results this year, they kind of speak for themselves, especially recently. Matty Schmid's had some top finishes in signature event and even major championship fields. That is infinitely more impressive than Rico Hoey finishing like top 20 once in a regular tour event this year, like maybe top 20 in an alternate field event that just really doesn't mean that much compared to Schmid doing it at legit events, even majors. Whereas Clanton on the other end, Smalley, you can't completely sleep on him. He's an above average tour player. Clanton, he's starting to show it this week. He had been really kind of struggling ever since getting his professional tour card. But now he's starting to show his talent level. I mean, you saw it when he was first an amateur and playing on tour, all those top 5, top 10s that he had his first couple months last year. That's the kind of player that Luke Clanton is. I mean, I'm close to the guy. I know him. I'm a little bit biased towards him as well. So sure, I think of him a little bit higher than most people do. But I've also seen the kid and I know what he's capable of. And I know the kind of personality that he has as well. He's very competitive, going to get under it in his own head sometimes. Like when he's struggling early on, like it could spiral a little bit, like for sure. That's just kind of the guy that he is. But once he starts to find some confidence, like you've seen this week, the birdies that he's been posting today was by far the worst round that he's had. It can really start to lead to some future success. So I hope that he can finish off this golf tournament strong. Win this matchup for us would be great too monetarily. But if he can finish strong, really like his chances for next week as well. So make sure to check out those 2. If you can get that plus 100, I would enter it. Hard Rock Bet probably going to give me the market with the tie. So if I'm going to ever consider playing those 2 with the tie, I'm probably looking at least wanting plus 120 odds to take that sort of gamble myself. So we'll see. Maybe they'll give me some lines that make sense. And one of these days, fingers crossed, they'll actually give us the market without ties so that we can enter some matchups for ourselves. But let's catch up on chat, see if there's anything that we need to deep dive before we hop on out of here, and then get after it for Sunday. And by the way, if you guys haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. Just pump up those numbers, right? Get this content out there to even more people. And check out the Patreon page too if you guys haven't already. See, so we got Philbo down there. You're looking at Cootie outright. Yeah, I've got Cootie for an outright right now, Phil. So he's actually my only sweat. If you want to join me on that sweat, then by all means, feel free to do so. But I got 75-1. So it'll be much different number than what I'm sweating. You're looking at Goddard for the over matchup versus Pendrith. So I would stay away from that one, especially because the 0.5 is getting given to Pendrith. Pendrith is not as high of a birdie maker as Gotterup. Gotterup's top 30 on tour. I was actually looking at that one earlier for the under between the two. So that's why I'm kind of saying not to take it, is because Pendrith with the extra 0.5 is where I thought the value was. That 0.5 means a lot more than most people would expect. And especially when it's a guy like Pendrith that's a capable player of his own, I might be a little hesitant about that one. You're looking at Nap for the over in 8 fairways. So with the push equity at 8, it's a little bit more stomachable, but you're talking about a bottom 150 driving accuracy player. So you're talking about somebody that's normally not very accurate. I'd rather go with the greens like I'm taking for myself. He said, yeah, you like the Nap greens? Yeah, me too. That's what I would rather go with, because that's a specialty, right? He's above average in that category, not so much with the driver. You're looking at Merritt under 69 strokes. Yeah, I don't know if I can get behind that one, man. He's a below average player, and I think the average is going to be -2. So once again, I think I'm on the other side of that. You're looking at more over 8.5 fairways. Hey, we're actually going to cut you off on questions. I can't break down the whole board for you, Antonio. I do that for my Patreon members, but yeah, I'm going to cut you off after 2. I'm sorry, man. And he said, got her up for the over 5.5 birdies. I don't think I can get there. With them moving 16 back, that's going to drop that average. Gotterup is an above average birdie maker, but that's going to be getting to 6 birdies, which is like 1.25 gain to the field. Just, I don't know. For me, it's too much to ask for. I know that he's been playing some really good golf, but I would rather take guys for a strokes line where it's just marginally better than the field than gaining 1.5 to 1.25 birdies to the field. So that's just what I would stick with. And then you're looking at Knapp and Stevens for the over on pars. Yeah, not going to do any overs on pars myself, man. I think that's a little bit of a degenerate category. And here's the reason for it, right? I mean, we can try and guess a player's score, amount of birdies, bogeys they make and stuff like that. But a pars bet is all about the amount of scoring volatility in a round. Do we really think there's a way to project scoring volatility in a round, right? How many birdies and bogeys a guy's posting overall? I don't think that there is, right? Like there's certain days where people are just hitting it to 20 feet and 2-putting all day. I don't think that's predictable in the slightest bit. So I would stay away from those, man. Someone out there's got to have a process for the pars or better, but I don't. And I don't pretend to have a process for it because, like I said, it just seems like a really degenerate bet. And you said, yeah, I'm not wrong. Yeah, that's the way I see it. And I'll call a spade a spade. It just is what it is on those sort of things. Not my favorite. You've got a huge outright on Nap. Dude, a lot of people have got outrights on Nap this week. I think he's probably the biggest community bet that I've seen in a while. I'm rooting for you guys. I didn't take the outright myself. I obviously have that prop exposure that I'll be riding with you guys. I'll have to take the look at the outright number. He's far enough back, right? He's not tied for the lead, or maybe they'll be hanging something at like 15, 20 to 1. I can get 15 to 20 to 1 on to win. I have no idea where he's listed. He could be 5, 7 to 1 for all I know. But if you got me into the double digits, preferably over 15 to 1, I might join you for a little bit of a Sunday sweat. But that's all I've got, guys. Like I said, I'm going to keep this one real quick. I'm a little cooked after this week. Just kind of just wanted to watch Happy Gilmore hang out with a few buddies over Discord here. So I promised them I'd be done by 9:25. Looks like we're going to hit that goal here. So subscribe to the Patreon for everything that I'll be posting for the evening and for round 4. And let's get it, guys.